what is the actual problem that has you here on the call today? If they don't admit or state that they have a problem, then this is not a sales call, and there will be no sale at the end of this call. Pirates have long fascinated the minds of men. Rebellious, adventurous, and free-spirited, they carved their own path in the world. After serving 10 years in the Navy, I took the plunge to write my own story. Since then, I've learned directly from some of the most savvy marketers in the game. My name is Ben Perry, and welcome to the Pirate Marketing Podcast. I am your host, the Pirate Marketing Captain, Ben Perry, and today's episode is going to dive into a little bit of the nuances of sales. So if you're already familiar with sales, if you've been rocking sales for a little bit, then today's episode might be a little bit more advanced for you. And even if you aren't advanced, this is still good if you are somebody who's new into sales or intermediate. And honestly, some of these advanced tactics are really more about revisiting the fundamentals of sales. But before we get into that, I wanted to give you guys an update on Lauren Jane. So we had her on the podcast 3 weeks ago. And what's interesting is that she has gone on to close 18 sales in the past 6 weeks. So just from her asking me questions, getting my feedback to give her so that she could be able to close these deals. I'm talking like she's asking me questions whenever we get out of the shower, asking me questions as we walk, whenever we drive, whenever we eat. It's been an interesting experience because, you know, I have the experience to be able to help her, and it just kind of meshes up really, really well. And so the biggest feedback that she's told me is like, hey, I thought I knew how sales was by watching you do it for years and years and years, and, you know, watching you take thousands of calls, but there's nothing like the feeling of actually being like in the arena on the battlefield, taking these sales calls myself. So I'm super proud of her. And it's awesome because she ends up being a fantastic case study for me, which is kind of where I find myself because, you know, I didn't know if I really wanted to teach sales. I mean, I know about sales, but I figured like sales was just one of the things that you did on the way to where you actually want to go. And so for me, I mean, I really want to help people. I want to be a force for good. I want to help people have transformations in their lives. And I saw that me learning how to do sales and then doing a bunch of sales, to me, it was just like, hey, like I've been, you know, using this car to drive across country, but I never thought about like teaching people how to like drive this particular car, if that makes sense. So it's just become very clear to me that like Lauren is absolutely brand new in sales, and me helping her has allowed her to be able to generate, you know, the kind of sales that she's had. And so, hey, if you have something that can help people, then do your best to be able to help them. And so, hey, I've got a certain brand, I've got a certain style. I've learned from a lot of different people. And so I'm kind of a mashup of a bunch of, you know, different people that I've learned from, but I think that everybody is. And, you know, if somebody is really, really, really good, they are usually good at hiding their sources. And the thing that I don't want to do is say or claim that I came up with any of this. I didn't. I learned from a lot of different mentors, learned from a lot of different books. And also I kind of just learned by doing the thing thousands of times. So anyway, that's kind of where I find myself here. Yeah, so let's get into the topic of today's episode. So I've been coaching privately one-on-one with an individual, and I gave him some feedback, but I figured that the feedback that I gave him is probably pretty ubiquitous, and probably a lot of other people might need to hear this as well. And so this will probably be a real short podcast episode, but I'm just going to share what I shared with him and go off in any tangents as I see fit. All right. So when you are in your sales call, I would submit that your most powerful time to be able to affect the outcome of the call is before you make the offer. It's everything before. In fact, I would argue that like 95% of the call is either won or lost in the beginning part of the sales call, where, the discovery phase, when you are understanding their situation, because there's a lot of different things that are happening. So they're showing up, the prospect, with their reality as they see it, and you're showing up with your reality as you see it. Now, by very definition of you being in that sales role, in that leadership role, you have a superior perception. And this needs to be clearly communicated in the very beginning. And this is communicated by you asking, what is the actual problem that has you here on the call today? If they don't admit or state that they have a problem, then this is not a sales call. And there will be no sale at the end of this call. No matter if you think you went through all of your process, if they don't admit to having a clearly defined specific problem, then you're not having a sales conversation. So that's the first thing. The other thing is you need to be probing and clarifying almost nonstop. Not to the point where it's disruptive, but you need to be curious about their telling of reality. Because if they say something and you don't ask why, or ask them to clarify, or probe a little bit, or in some sales circumstances where you're already seen as the kind of de facto authority, if you don't push back on their reality as they describe it, then that becomes the reality of the call. And if you try to address that particular topic down the line, whether it's, in a few minutes, or even if you wait 30 seconds, it's like wet cement gets thrown out. And if you don't clearly make sure that cement is nice and flat, so that, if somebody is walking along the sidewalk and they don't trip and fall, if you don't scrape it to where it is nice and level, then it hardens and you're not able to go back. Or rather, I would say it is next to as impossible as I'd like to say things are. Okay. Because you need to clearly be guiding and probing in the call as they're saying as they're giving you their information. But if somebody says something like, so for instance, my client, they have this offer where they need help. They need a job. And so a lot of times these people have savings that they're living off of until they find the next job. So we've defined it as how much runway do you actually have? Okay. So this person on a call that I was reviewing, the prospect said, yeah, it's not like I have a whole bunch of money in savings to be able to keep doing this for a long time. But, yada, yada, yada. He continued on. What would have been an appropriate place to clarify, well, how much of a runway do you actually have, would be right as he says it. Okay. But instead, The conversation was never interrupted. There was no clarifying or probing happening during that particular phase. And it was addressed like 30 to 60 seconds later. But here's the problem. When it was addressed later, it makes it almost too late, because what ended up happening is, my client asked, well, how much of a runway do you actually have? And the prospect changed his tone and said, well, what do you mean? This prospect had been a very affable, free-flowing, free-going guy, answering the questions, like everything was good. But as soon as he asked the question, how much a runway do you actually have, his tone changed all of a sudden. So it's like playing a musical note and then you hit a wrong chord, because he was like, what do you mean? And now you have to explain yourself, and it becomes weird. And you're also adding on extra time on your call. So instead, what he could have done is, as soon as the person said, hey, it's not like I have a whole bunch of money just sitting around in savings, you could be like, how much of a runway do you actually have? He would get, the prospect, what you're talking about, because the context is there. So it's very important whenever you're doing the uncovering their situation, uncovering their reality, that you probe and you clarify and you make sure that you are challenging what they're saying. If you know it to be ineffective or not useful, let's say somebody's way of thinking, which I would argue that all sales is helping people to think about their problems better. Because honestly, the only reason why you don't have the solution that you're looking for is because you are not thinking about your problem in a way that would help you to solve it. It's usually 9 times out of 10. Are there tools? Are there, apps and like different strategies? Yes, but again, it usually comes from not thinking about your problem in a way that lines up in a manner to where you're congruent to be able to get that outcome. So that's a long way of saying, ask more probing and clarifying questions, particularly in the beginning, because that sets the pace, and particularly during the consequence phase, where you're really asking them like what their cost of inaction is, right? If they say, I don't know if I can do this anymore, you need to clarify. Do what? Keep working 80 hours a week. Got it. Well, what do you mean by that? So notice how we're going from the top layer. I don't know if I can do it anymore. What do you mean? I can't work 80 hours a week. What do you mean? There's another layer. I mean, if I keep down this path, I'm going to burn out. Now, you might take that as face value. And this is another mistake that I see a lot of salespeople make, is they assume and they take what the prospect is saying and they go, well, obviously it's self-evident. Burnt out is burnt out. You don't want to be burnt out, but you can't take the bait. You can't fall into that trap because you don't know what they mean by burnt out. They might mean something else. They might mean something else that describes that feeling of feeling burnt out. They might feel frustrated. They might feel overwhelmed. But you won't know until you ask them, what do you mean burnt out? I mean, I feel like I might just go crazy, go postal. And then you hear that and you go, whoa. And how long have you felt that way? And this is where, by going several layers deep in your probing and clarifying, that you can actually get to the meat And normally, a lot of people, they have their personas up, right? Greek persona, meaning person behind, like, sonar, right? It's like the mask. The person is not actually there. So once you crack that persona by going deeper and deeper and deeper, what you might find is an eruption of emotion or just flat out crying. So you're either looking for an eruption of emotion or flat out crying. Because when you hear those, it's like, oh, we hit on a pain point there. Now, in sales, we kind of throw that out all the time, but this is where it's like genuinely like you hit gold here. Now, I'm not glamorizing this. I'm just saying, for the purposes of you being able to be an effective sales professional and getting to the root of somebody's actual problem, like what is the problem behind the problem? Or as Travis Sago says, getting the truth on the table. What is actually going on? But you'll never get there if you don't probe and clarify. Too many sales professionals will just glide over or get uncomfortable asking these deep questions to people, especially super analytical people, because they don't want to open up at all. But I'll tell you what, I went through my time at analyticalpeople like .com all last year when all I did was talk to accountants. You want to know what one of the most challenging jobs in the world is getting on call after call, back to back to back, getting accountants to open up about their pain. Like, I think I unconsciously chose the hard level when it comes to sales. So I had those people going deep. So if I can get super analytical people to go deep with their emotion, so can you. Okay. You want to be very mindful that you're not projecting your beliefs or your stance onto your prospect. Here's why. Not only is it going to increase sales resistance, but it's going to create a disconnect between them, because you are looking to get their words and then use their words. And very smooth, kind of like, the used car salesman type of methodology is saying, well, you don't have time to settle, right? It's cleverly worded in a way that kind of forces the person to say no, right? You kind of box them in with the way that you've worded your question. But there's a better way to do it, because people know what you're doing when you say that. And what are they supposed to say? Yes. So even though they're like falling into your trap, they know what you're doing, and it just creates more sales resistance. A better way, instead of saying, you don't have time to settle, right? You could say, do you really have time to settle? You're allowing them. It's like an open-ended kind of question, and it could be a yes, but it could also be like, it's open for them to say no, or maybe, or kind of. But when you craft your questions in a way that kind of creates this yes ladder box, they know it, you know it, and it's going to show up at the end of the call, because you might have been slick with all of your yes ladders, but it won't mean anything until a deal is actually made and you get paid, right? Let's see. Keep your pitches to 5 minutes tops, right? You might go over a little bit, but I'm saying like that's a sweet spot to keep when you make your offer. Because if you go too long, then you run the risk of the person losing all of that emotional like leverage that you help them to understand. But the further away that you go from after you leave consequence and you leave that emotional, leverage point, the less that emotion kind of calms down, right? So you get their buying temperature up, But if your pitch is super long, then it's like inverse, right? Your pitch is long and their emotion goes down and logic comes back up. I'm not saying that, people that buy are not being logical, but I'm saying people buy with emotion. And a lot of times, like, think about this. You're doing somebody a massive service when you help them to connect to what it's really costing them to stay stuck, to keep spinning around in circles. And some of these people you might be talking to might have had this problem for 3, 5, 10, 20 plus years. And only through them talking to somebody like you, who is a trained professional in the ability to understand the problem and to help them to see what it's costing them to stay where they're at. People don't have these conversations. They just don't. Or they avoid them like the plague. Because a lot of people like to compartmentalize their problems and not deal with them. And most times, they don't actually have a plan. Like, their plan is to keep doing what they have been doing. Like, their best plan is no plan. So, but is that really true? Or are they ignoring all of the things, all of the consequences that are actually happening? And when you can pull up the rug and shine a light on all of the things that are going wrong because they haven't faced this truth, when you're able to do that, that's the moment to be able to help them understand, to help them make a swift, powerful decision. Because if you don't follow the process, if you don't probe and clarify, if you don't do it during the consequence phase where you're asking them, how much longer are you willing to allow yourself to continue to stay where you're at? If you don't do that, then they're going to go right back into their reality and you haven't helped them. But if you do that, hold them, at least be a mirror for them, and to ask permission to be that person of accountability, which sometimes people will ask for, then you can help guide them towards what they actually want. And is it going to be a little bit uncomfortable? You bet your ass is going to be uncomfortable. You want them to be uncomfortable. Like, you want them to feel like, holy shit, this is a massive decision. But also, what happens if you don't do anything? You can't, or you won't have any leverage if you don't actually help them to understand the true cost of inaction. And you do that by making the pitch super short and then ask them how would they like to take care of the investment. Super, super simple. So ditch the long pitches, make it short. If you're going to do a visual presentation, I wouldn't have a whole bunch of words on the slides, because the more words on the slides, the more somebody can zone out. I know that's true for me. Whenever I was in school, I was kind of the class clown. I'd be the one cracking jokes because, man, I just can't stand sitting in a chair. Like, I would just have to crack jokes and be a wise ass. And then if there was slides, I would be reading the slides and not listening to what the teacher, professor, or instructor was saying. And the same thing might be happening to you if you've got a very verbose visual presentation. So if you want to close more sales, chop that shit up, keep it short, and then say what you're going to say. So here's something. Keep the pitch to what you're going to do, right? We're going to cover these 3 or 4 pillars. We're going to do this, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this. Any questions? Yeah, I get that we're going to do A, B, C, and D. I get that we're going to do 1, 2, 3, and 4, but I guess, like, how does it actually work? I still don't understand. This is good because you want to control that question. Part of doing sales and doing the same sales call over and over and over is you begin to see patterns. And you begin to see when people are asking the same questions Like you can tee people up and you can lead them on a series of questions to where you know exactly where they're going to go based off of the questions that you've asked them. I mean, that's the whole basis of any PQ. The only thing that kind of changes is the actual individual pitch. But if you can make the pitch be the what and get them to ask about the how, now you can control that flow of information. So if it's on your pitch deck, or if it's on your visual presentation, take it off and handle it verbally. I like to control the how, because somebody, and I like to think of it like this. If you put too much information in your pitch, you might overwhelm your prospect to where you get to the end, they go, wow, you've given me a lot of information. I'm just going to have to go away and think about this. And they might be like not bullshitting you. They might be 100% honest. Like, this is a ton of information, but information is not what they're looking for. They're looking for transformation. And so you putting everything that could possibly be done in the offer, when you make the offer, is like having a pizza with every freaking topping on it. It's like you've got pepperoni and sausage and anchovies and green bell peppers and red bell peppers and olives and it's like, that's not necessarily going to be a good pizza. They might only want a cheese pizza. And so if you just say, do you want a pizza? And they say, yes, be like, and the pizza is just cheese. You go, here you go. You might have just saved yourself 20 to 25 fucking minutes of you describing and going through all the different to-dos. And this is how it happens. But you won't know unless you keep the pitch to just the what. Now they might say, okay, I see what we're going to do, the pizza, but like, how does it actually work? What do you mean? Well, I guess how much time are you actually expecting me to put into this? Oh, so now this is the equivalent of they're looking for pepperoni. Here, let's sprinkle some pepperoni on it. Answer their question. Yeah, it just really depends on, where people are at. Some people, like if they don't have a lot going on, they might need to put a little bit more time in. People who've already got established businesses, they probably won't need a whole lot of time. So it really just depends. And boom, you've just kept it to a cheese pizza. They asked about the time, so we sprinkled a little bit of pepperoni. They said, all right, sounds great. How would you like to take care of that? They go, this sounds awesome. And then they pay. All you had to do was make a cheese pizza with pepperoni. Now, some people might ask for the anchovies and the black olives and all of that, but you won't know if you don't pace how you give that information. So I've given you guys a little bit to think about here, but I'm just telling you, after thousands of calls, you don't want to be just giving away everything and then they're just like completely lost and they're just like, I'm sorry, what? So pace your offer. I'm going to dock the episode there because we've gone on a journey. I think this is great. And if you're listening on the podcast, I appreciate you. If you find this valuable, leave me a review. Leaves you, probably take you about 30 seconds to just say, hey, this is awesome. Or even if it's not awesome, I'd love to hear your feedback. And if you're watching on YouTube, thanks for being here. Hopefully you're here on a binge session and you're enjoying the content. I'm investing into figuring out exactly how to do this YouTube game because I really think that there's a lot of power here. So, and it's also the power of creating content and it goes out to all these various different platforms. I freaking love it. So I'm Ben Perry, Pirate Marketing Captain, and I will catch you on the next one. Savvy.